used to work hours on my mobility without having any idea of what I was doing. I'd follow one routine for a while, jump to another one, scrap it, and start all over again. Or I'd skip the routine altogether and just start stretching, hoping I'd figure it out as I went. Yet, weeks later, I hadn't made any progress. The more information I consumed, the more I overthought everything, wasting even more time. That is until I did something ridiculously simple. I didn't actually believe that it worked. 5 exercises. That's it. Because once you master those, you have a blueprint you can use to improve almost every major aspect of your mobility. So if you're ready, let's go and have some fun. This is a squat. But this is also a squat. This is also a squat, a Cossack squat. So is this, just a much higher level of Cossack squat. This is a staggered squat. And we can also stagger our squat forward instead of just laterally. As well as this, even though it doesn't look like it, is also a squat, a deep squat, 90-90 switch. And this, believe it or not, is also a squat. A sissy squat. My point being that the squat is not just an exercise, it is basically an avenue for complete lower body mobility mastery, because the variations of what we can do out of a squat position are basically endless and can target pretty much every single joint, every single tendon, every single ligament in our lower body and help us achieve freedom of movement that is hard to parallel with any other foundational exercise. And where we start is right here, working on being able to hold a deep or a resting squat for multiple minutes at a time without having to get out of this position, because as the name suggests, this should be a relaxing position for us, one that does not require any sort of strength, but is there to help us release any sort of tension we have through resting in a deep, close to the ground position, which does something that most people lack the ability to do, which is take both their knees and their hips through a full range of motion when it comes to flexion. An ability we lose because most people do not actively work on achieving those tiny angles in their knees and hips. And as your mobility starts improving, your heels start flattening on the floor, your hips start flexing more, your upper body starts relaxing into this deep position, open up all the way, giving you enough space to fully acclimate to those lower to the ground movement patterns. This is where you can start truly using the potential of the squatting position, working your way up to being able to hold this for 5 to 10 minutes at a time without needing a break. And while we are working on that, we will also start working on the strength, endurance, and full body mobility to be able to do 50 to 100 repetitions at a time without taking a break, which, while taking us more into the strength endurance level of movement, is also a very effective way at helping us work on lower body mobility in conjunction with our core to start opening up our lower body for more and more advanced movement patterns, such as the classic pistol squat, which requires a lot of mobility, a lot of strength, and a lot of coordination and stabilization to go through properly. And this is where we can start having a lot of fun and using some creativity when it comes to our squatting movement patterns, opening up our hips, for instance, with an extension added to the flexion, or as we did before, moving into different hip rotations, internal and external, in the combination movement that requires a lot of strength, coordination, and mobility overall. So if there is one lower body movement pattern you should use as a foundation for mobility, it is definitely the squat. As usual, this video is sponsored by you. By liking this video, subscribing to the channel, watching the whole video until the end, hell, maybe even you're crazy enough to leave a comment. That is the only type of sponsorship I could ever ask for. And I will diligently use the ad money to buy even more gourmet cat food. Shoulder rotations and dislocates are the foundation we will use for our upper body mobility, because just like we did with the squat, this basic movement will open up a whole new avenue of movement patterns for our upper body. As our mobility increases, we will start grabbing closer and closer, requiring more and more flexibility from all the surrounding muscles and tissues around our rotator cuff to go through a full repetition, stretching our pecs, our delts, our traps, and opening up our upper body. And most importantly, and this is without exaggeration, life-changing when it comes to upper body mobility, actively, in a controlled fashion, taking our scapula, our shoulder blades, through all the major positionings. which include scapular abduction, pulling them apart, scapular elevation, pulling our shoulder blades up, scapular adduction, pulling our shoulder blades together, and scapular depression, pulling them all the way down, which next to being responsible for proper shoulder movement, will also help you with a lot of upper body problems that we get from being seated a lot. Because we're not just flailing our arms around, we are always actively pulling our shoulder blades in those positions, which actually does require a lot of strength, a lot of coordination and control to be able to do it properly, strengthening everything we would need for proper upper body posture that doesn't go into the absurd, but actually brings us into a natural position, which means the position we would naturally fall into if we did not have a lack of mobility surrounding our shoulders. And just like the squat, we have endless variations from asymmetrical or unilateral rotations, which open up one side more than the other, to something like behind the back rotations, which help us open up our chest and anterior delts a lot while helping us work more and more on those scapular movement positions. Two movements that take our rotator cuffs through tiny rotations while still adding a lot of mobility benefits through lengthening the surrounding muscle tissue. And even here, the more creative you can be with the stick, and you do not need a training stick or whatever, all you need is a broomstick or even a piece of string if that is all you have, adding more and more mobility benefits, like for instance lateral flexion in our spine, which will help us connect upper body to lower body mobility while we are working on spinal health, which is crucial, which leads us directly into the bridge family of exercises. And trust me, this is far less scary as it looks, because this exercise is just as much a bridge as this exercise. In fact, bridge exercises do something very amazing that is very hard to replicate with other exercises, which is combining massive amounts of anterior chain flexibility with posterior chain strength and moving us into complete spinal extension as we progress in our range of motion, helping us both strengthen and stretch some of the most problem-prone zones people suffer from as they grow older and as they spend more and more time in seated positions that do not require any sort of mobility. So we start with short ranges of motion, bridging our lower body first, opening up our quads, hip flexors and lower abdominals while strengthening our biceps femoris, our glutes and our spinal erectors, then increasing our range of motion by adding heel raises, which are now going to activate our gastrocnemius and soleus as well, or the musculature in our lower legs, while additionally helping us strengthen our foot musculature, which is crucial for anything that requires stabilization. Then we can start increasing our range of motion by adding elevation, which is going to increase both the flexibility as well as the strength benefits. And then we can start adding our upper body, which you can also do with assistance by simply leaning backwards. You can use a bench, or much more helpful if you have access to a bozo ball, which is going to make it so easy to move in this back bridge position with a lot of assistance. So we do not require any sort of strength, and we can actively just work on opening up our anterior chain, now adding our chest, our anterior delts as well, and even our forearm musculature into more lengthened positions before we start adding upper body lifts just for a half a second before we reverse, and over time as we progress, increasing our range of motion more and more until we can practically extend our arms, move up onto our toes, lengthen our shoulders, and now move into complete spinal extension, which also means complete anterior chain flexibility. Which leaves us with one problem. Yep, you guessed it. Posterior chain flexibility, or the lengthening of every single muscle in the backside of our body, which can also be done through multiple avenues, with the easiest one being a simple extended leg forward fold or moving into a complete pike position. And if you can keep this one simple thing in mind, you can improve far quicker than most people. Because while this is a forward fold, you are actually cheating yourself out of all of the posterior chain flexibility benefits we would get from doing this correctly, which is moving into spinal extension and then bending in our hips, now maximizing posterior chain flexibility with more and more range of motion as we progress. And only when we have gotten all the flexibility for our glutes, our biceps, our gastric, our soleus, and our Achilles tendon, only then should we start working on lengthening our spinal erectors and stretching our lower back musculature as well. Or working on both separately by combining something like an extended back hip hinge, lengthening, holding for a second, and then actively flexing and pushing our glutes forward before we move into the next repetition with something that stretches our lumbar spinal musculature, like the switch between cat-cow, or basically moving into extension and flexion in our spine, which over time, while we start lengthening our spinal musculature, will also help us move to our actual goal in the exercise that now combines all of these, which is the classic Jefferson curl, maximizing both posterior chain flexibility with controlled posterior chain strength and an ever-increasing range of motion as we progress in both of those aspects, decompressing our spine, lengthening our hamstrings, our glutes, our spinal erectors, and even helping us decompress our shoulders, feeding into the exercises we did for opening up our rotator cuffs. In fact, the Jefferson curl might be one of the most scary looking yet highly effective mobility exercises that can truly help you work on overall longevity, because it does one thing that most people never actually work on, which is strengthening your spine in compromised positions, or basically working on strength movements that come out of a flexed or a rounded back, something you've probably been told to never do. But what is even better than never doing it is doing it in a controlled fashion with minimum amount of resistance to train your spine, if it ever happens that your body is in one of these compromised positions, to not fall apart and to actually be able to reverse out of it without injury. Which means that you will progress from a very tiny weight with a very short range of motion until you have the necessary flexibility and control to move with a tiny weight into a long range of motion, to increasing resistance incrementally, once again, first with a short range of motion, until you work your way to the longest possible movement with more and more resistance for a very controlled, very strength and flexibility dominant exercise for our entire posterior chain. Last but not least, an exercise family that combines everything. Start adding crawling exercises to your mobility workouts, combining full body coordination with full body strength, endurance, and mobility. And here is the amazing part about this. There is an endless amount of crawling variations, but here is an easy progression you can start working your way through, starting with the very beginner-friendly baby crawl, requiring a minimum amount of strength while working on this unilateral or asymmetrical coordination where we move right with left, left with right, and start working on the tiniest bit of strength in our entire body to go through more advanced ones, like the bear crawl, where we simply raise our knees the tiniest bit from the floor to now add massive amounts of lower body strength to a little bit more upper body strength, and requiring more control through this movement, especially once we start adding backwards to the forward movements. A gorilla style crawl, where our hips are the slightest bit above our shoulders, shifting our weight forward, requiring more upper body strength while adding the tiniest bit of posterior chain flexibility in our legs. A very low with the hips, ape-like movement patterns, massively opening up our hips while requiring a lot more strength from our hip flexors as well as our quads through longer and longer steps. A short lateral ape-like movement pattern which maximizes ankle, knee and hip mobility while adding a lot more upper body strength, and then a long lateral movement pattern, which opens up our adductors as well and starts working on massive amounts of lower body mobility in conjunction with a lot of upper body strength. The slower and the more controlled we go through this. A completely extended movement pattern, the giraffe walk, for instance, which maximizes posterior chain flexibility and requires a lot more strength from our quads as well as our hip flexors. Or, I love this one because it also looks a bit funny, the ostrich walk, which also massive amounts of posterior chain flexibility. It looks like a lot of fun because it also is a lot of fun. And of course, we're always working forward and backwards. And then the most advanced, most strength and mobility dominant one that'll challenge your entire body, but is also a massive amount of fun, the lizard crawl, which now adds a massive amount of spinal and hip rotation, a massive amount of strength, a massive amount of coordination, a ton of flexibility as well, and will challenge you if you're not used to moving long movements close to the floor with your entire body while coordinating all four appendages, and of course backwards requiring massive amounts of strength from our upper body, while forward requiring a little bit more strength from our lower than our upper body. If you like the video and subscribe. Join us, we do stuff like that very regularly, which means I'll probably see you very soon. So until then, have a good one. Captain Cairo, peace out.